Behind prison walls, survival isn't guaranteed, it's earned. Gangs rule through fear, loyalty, and codes written in blood. Refuse to follow and you don't just risk a beating, you risk your life. Stay tuned, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more true stories from the darkest corners of the prison system. Step into a maximum security prison in Texas in the late 1970s. The air is thick with sweat, cigarette smoke, and tension. Guards in khaki uniforms patrol the tiers, but make no mistake, they don't control these cell blocks. The real power belongs to the gangs. Behind bars, gangs aren't just cliques or fraternities. They are armies, governments, and in many cases, executioners. Their codes aren't posted on walls or handed out in rulebooks. They're passed down by word of mouth, etched into tattoos, and enforced through violence. The Texas Syndicate, one of the oldest and most feared gangs in the Lone Star State, rose out of necessity. In the early 1970s, Hispanic inmates in California and Texas prisons felt outnumbered and vulnerable. Anglo-dominated gangs like the Aryan Brotherhood or black-led organizations like the Black Guerrilla Family were already powerful forces. To survive, Mexican-American inmates banded together. From this crucible of fear and violence, the Texas Syndicate was born. But membership wasn't a casual choice, it was a binding oath. Court records and testimonies in Texas confirm that once you joined the syndicate, there was no leaving. The code was simple. Loyalty to your brothers came before everything, before family, before freedom, even before life itself. Betrayal meant death, and hesitation could mean the same. Inside, the initiation rites were brutal. Prospective members, called prospects, had to prove their loyalty by spilling blood. Sometimes that meant stabbing a rival, sometimes it meant beating down a fellow inmate who had crossed the line. One ex-inmate testified in a Texas courtroom that when he was recruited, the order was clear: you either ride with us or you die against us. He carried out a stabbing in the prison yard under the watchful eyes of his new brothers. From that moment he was bound for life. The syndicate's codes weren't just about violence, they were about order. Every member had obligations: participate in gang missions, contribute to the kitty, the shared fund for contraband and legal fees, and obey the commands of leaders. If an order came down to kill, you didn't ask why, you asked how. And when contraband flowed, cigarettes, drugs, even cell phones, it was the syndicate who decided who got what and at what price. Refuse to pay and you risked your safety. The gang also thrived on extortion. Small-time hustlers, vulnerable inmates, and those without protection often found themselves taxed. If you had a commissary account, a portion of it went to the syndicate, or else. Guards might turn a blind eye either out of fear or because they were compromised. Testimony from federal investigations showed how inmates working in kitchen or laundry jobs were forced to hand over food or supplies to gang members. The message was always the same: pay the tax or pay in blood. Meanwhile, over in California, the Black Guerrilla Family was building its own empire, one rooted in not just criminal enterprise but also ideology. Founded in 1966 at San Quentin by George Jackson, the BGF was more than a gang. It was a political movement, aligning itself with revolutionary ideals and black liberation. Members swore allegiance not only to each other but also to a cause: the overthrow of what they saw as a racist and oppressive system. But make no mistake, ideology didn't make the BGF less violent. Their codes were just as strict, their punishments just as brutal. Loyalty was demanded, not requested. Tattoos marked the initiated: the dragon, the rifle, the black fist. They weren't just symbols, they were declarations that the bearer lived and died for the family. In 2013, the FBI exposed how BGF leaders inside Maryland prisons had infiltrated entire facilities. They ran drug rings, ordered murders, and even seduced and compromised correctional officers. Court documents revealed how one female officer became pregnant by a BGF leader while smuggling in contraband under his orders. The gang's reach went far beyond cell walls. For new inmates, survival meant learning the codes quickly. You couldn't just walk into a yard and mind your business. Neutrality was almost impossible. If you weren't protected by a gang, you were prey. Inmates describe it as a wolf and sheep world. Either you run with a pack or you get eaten alive. One former prisoner recalled stepping off the bus at Huntsville, Texas, and being approached before he'd even reached his cell. "Who are you with?" a heavily tattooed man asked. It wasn't a friendly introduction, it was a test. Declaring no affiliation was dangerous. Declaring the wrong one could be deadly. From day one you had to choose carefully, or someone else would choose for you. The codes of the prison gangs weren't written on paper, but they governed every aspect of life: how you walked in the yard, who you sat with in the chow hall, even how you spoke. A wrong look could be interpreted as disrespect. A careless word could spark a war. And once blood was spilled, the cycle of retaliation could spiral for years. These codes didn't just shape prison life, they redefined survival itself. Behind bars, respect was currency, fear was power, and silence was law. In this world, men weren't just serving time, they were living by rules harsher than any court sentence. And as we'll see in the chapters ahead, these codes would spread far beyond the prison walls, influencing street crime, national investigations, and even the policies meant to contain them. In prison, loyalty is not a choice, it's survival. For gangs, loyalty is written in blood, enforced with steel and remembered in scars. Once you pledge allegiance, you belong to the gang until your last breath. This isn't a movie oath or a secret handshake. It is an irreversible contract, sealed through violence and fear. The Texas Syndicate, the Aryan Brotherhood, and the Black Guerrilla Family all demanded the same thing: absolute loyalty no matter the cost. Consider the Texas Syndicate. Court transcripts from Texas in the 1980s revealed chilling testimony about how initiations were carried out. One former member described how new recruits had to make their bones by attacking an enemy of the syndicate, sometimes with fists, often with homemade shanks. These weren't symbolic acts. They were tests of courage, brutality, and most of all, obedience. The gang needed to know you were willing to follow orders, even if it meant spilling blood in broad daylight. One recruit recalled stabbing a man in the prison yard, surrounded by guards and cameras. The act wasn't about killing, it was about showing that he would do anything for the gang. This blood oath extended far beyond initiation. If a leader ordered a hit, the command had to be followed. Refusing wasn't an option. In Texas prisons, records show countless examples of inmates murdered not because of personal disputes, but because orders had been handed down from above. In one 1990s case, syndicate leaders ordered the murder of a member suspected of cooperating with investigators. The man was cornered in a day room and stabbed repeatedly in front of dozens of inmates. No one intervened, not the other prisoners, not the guards. Everyone knew the rule: stay silent or you could be next. The Aryan Brotherhood followed the same principle. Their motto was blood in, blood out. To join, you had to commit an act of violence. To leave, the only way out was death. Federal trials have documented countless murders ordered by the Brotherhood to enforce this code. In 2002, prosecutors revealed that the Aryan Brotherhood had ordered over 30 killings from inside prison walls, all carried out with surgical precision. Their leaders, even when locked in solitary confinement, could reach across state lines to command executions in yards they hadn't stepped foot in for years. The Black Guerrilla Family enforced loyalty in a different way, through ideology as well as fear. To them, loyalty wasn't just to the gang but to the struggle. When George Jackson, their founder, was killed in San Quentin in 1971, his death became a rallying point. Members pledged not just to protect each other, but to carry forward a revolution. Yet this ideological loyalty was backed by the same brutal enforcement. In 2013, an FBI sting in Maryland revealed how deeply the BGF's code of loyalty ran. Dozens of correctional officers were compromised, some smuggling in drugs, others carrying out the gang's orders. One officer was even branded with a tattoo symbolizing her allegiance to the family. She wasn't just breaking the rules of her profession, she was pledging her life to the gang. For inmates, these codes of loyalty created impossible choices. Refusing to join could mean being marked as prey. Accepting meant being chained to a life of violence. One former inmate described the dilemma in a 2007 interview: "You think you have a choice but you don't. Either you walk into the yard alone and risk getting killed, or you take the deal and promise your loyalty. Once you do, you're theirs forever." The enforcement of loyalty extended even into the smallest details of prison life. If a gang member was attacked, even for personal reasons, the entire gang was expected to retaliate. Failing to stand by your brother meant you were just as guilty as the attacker. This led to endless cycles of violence. A fight over a stolen radio could escalate into a gang war. A single insult in the chow hall could result in a yard lockdown and multiple stabbings. Loyalty meant never walking away, never backing down, and never betraying the gang's code of silence. Silence itself was perhaps the most sacred rule. The no-snitching code wasn't just an idea, it was enforced with death sentences. Dozens of cases across the U.S. have shown how inmates suspected of cooperating with investigators were killed within days, sometimes hours, of being exposed. In one Texas prison, an inmate who was rumored to be talking to guards was found dead in his cell, strangled with a sheet. No one claimed responsibility, but everyone knew why it happened. The message was clear: loyalty to the gang comes before loyalty to the law. What makes these codes even more terrifying is how they outlive prison sentences. For many inmates, release doesn't mean freedom. Gang loyalty follows them into the outside world. Former members have described how orders would still reach them after parole, sometimes to carry out a hit, sometimes to collect money, sometimes just to remind them that leaving was impossible. The blood oath wasn't confined to cell walls, it was permanent. The brutality of these codes ensured that gangs weren't just prison groups. They became institutions, feared by inmates and respected, even if grudgingly, by guards. Corrections officers knew that crossing a gang could be as dangerous for them as it was for inmates. This is why in so many cases, prisons became kingdoms within kingdoms, where the official rules of the state mattered far less than the unwritten codes of the gangs. The code of loyalty was more than just a survival strategy. It was a psychological trap, one that turned men into soldiers and soldiers into martyrs. Once bound by blood, there was no way back. And in the chapters to come, we'll see how these codes of loyalty and silence didn't just control the prison yards, they reshaped the very system built to contain them. Violence is not random behind bars, it's the backbone of the gang system. In the free world, disputes might be settled through words, lawyers, or courts. In prison there is only one law: retaliation. Every gang, from the Texas Syndicate to the Aryan Brotherhood to the Black Guerrilla Family, lives by the principle that no act of disrespect or betrayal goes unanswered. To survive, inmates learn fast that one fight is never just one fight. Every punch, every stabbing, every insult can ignite a war. Prison officials have long admitted this brutal reality. In 2005, a Texas Department of Criminal Justice report detailed how even the smallest incidents escalated into gang conflicts. A stolen radio in the chow hall might look petty to an outsider, but behind bars it carried symbolic weight. If a gang allowed one of their own to be disrespected without responding, their reputation was shattered. Respect was everything. Without it, gangs lost their power and individuals became targets. Violence, therefore, was not just revenge, it was currency, a way of reinforcing the gang's dominance. Take the Aryan Brotherhood, for example. In 1980, a feud between the Aryan Brotherhood and the Mexican Mafia erupted in California prisons. What began as a fight over drug profits spiraled into years of bloodshed. Dozens of inmates were stabbed, beaten, or killed in retaliation attacks. Court filings later revealed that Brotherhood leaders issued green lights, death orders, against members of rival gangs. Once greenlit, an inmate became a walking dead man. Anyone loyal to the Brotherhood had to act on sight. Ignoring the order was as good as betraying the gang. The cycle of retaliation could last for decades. In one California case, a single killing in the yard triggered a chain reaction of revenge hits that continued for over 10 years. Generations of inmates who weren't even present at the original fight were drawn into the blood feud simply because of their gang affiliations. The violence became self-sustaining, a machine that no one could stop. The Black Guerrilla Family operated under the same principle. Their history is filled with high-profile retaliations, both inside and outside prison. One of the most infamous incidents occurred in 1971, when George Jackson, the group's founder, was killed during an escape attempt at San Quentin. The response was immediate and explosive. Inmates loyal to Jackson launched violent uprisings in multiple prisons, attacking guards and rival gangs alike. His death became a symbol, and retaliation wasn't just about avenging a man, it was about defending the family's honor. Even decades later, the BGF's code of retaliation continued. In Maryland, the 2013 federal indictment showed how leaders inside the prison used contraband cell phones to orchestrate hits. One message intercepted by investigators ordered an attack on a rival who had refused to pay drug debts. Within days, the man was stabbed multiple times in his cell. The retaliation wasn't chaotic, it was planned, deliberate, and merciless. In Texas, the syndicate enforced retaliation through what inmates called blood debts. If you harmed a member, you owed blood in return. The debt didn't expire. One inmate who attacked a syndicate soldier during a card game thought he had avoided consequences after serving out his sentence. But years later, when he returned to prison on a parole violation, he was stabbed in the showers within 48 hours. The syndicate had not forgotten. The message was clear: debts are eternal. Retaliation wasn't limited to gang-on-gang conflict. Even interactions with guards could spark violence. While prison officers technically had authority, they were not immune from the cycle. If a guard humiliated or abused a gang member, retaliation might come swiftly. In California in the 1990s, several officers were attacked after allegedly targeting inmates affiliated with powerful gangs. While the state often downplayed these incidents, internal investigations showed a clear pattern. Gangs viewed retaliation against staff as just another way of enforcing their codes of respect. The methods of retaliation were as brutal as they were creative. Homemade shanks, crafted from toothbrushes, sharpened metal, or even melted plastic, were the most common tools. But gangs also used lock-in-a-sock weapons, boiling water mixed with baby oil, and razor blades hidden in their mouths. Each weapon carried symbolic weight. A stabbing in the yard was a public statement. An attack in a cell was a quiet execution. Either way, the point was the same: disrespect us and blood will flow. For ordinary inmates, this cycle of violence created a constant state of fear. Neutrality offered no safety. Even if you weren't affiliated, you could be caught in the crossfire. Inmates described the tension as living on a razor's edge. A day could start with breakfast and end with a lockdown after a stabbing in the showers. Retaliation was always expected, and the threat of the next attack hung over every interaction. Prison officials tried to break these cycles through lockdowns and segregation, but often these measures only reinforced the problem. By isolating gang leaders in solitary confinement, prisons unintentionally gave them more mystique and authority. Messages still leaked out through kites, smuggled notes, or through compromised guards. Retaliation orders didn't need a loud voice, they only needed a whisper. The code of violence and retaliation ensured that prisons remained in a constant state of war. Every act of aggression demanded a response. Every insult required blood. The gangs thrived on it, feeding their reputations and controlling their members through fear. And as we'll see in the next chapter, this endless cycle of violence wasn't confined to prison walls. It shaped entire communities outside, pulling street gangs, families, and even neighborhoods into its deadly orbit. Behind bars, space is power. In a world where every inch of concrete is contested, territory becomes the battlefield on which survival is decided. Control of a cell block, a yard bench, or even a single table in the chow hall signals dominance. For prison gangs, this territorial control is not just symbolic, it's the foundation of their power. Whoever controls the space controls the flow of contraband, the balance of respect, and ultimately life and death. The geography of a prison may seem ordinary to outsiders. Cell blocks stacked like honeycombs, narrow corridors, fenced yards, chow halls, and showers. But to inmates, each of these spaces carries meaning. They're claimed, negotiated, and defended. Investigations into California and Texas prisons have repeatedly shown how gangs map out facilities like militaries plotting borders. The Aryan Brotherhood, for instance, often claimed workout areas or tables in the yard as their own. Black Guerrilla Family members marked sections of the chow hall. The Texas Syndicate carved out corners of day rooms. These weren't random preferences, they were statements of dominance. Sit in the wrong seat and you were inviting a war. Court filings from the 1990s in California detail how the Mexican mafia, known as La IM, ran entire prison wings through territorial control. Guards often discovered that inmate movement, housing assignments, and even shower rotations had been dictated not by prison administration, but by La IM shot callers. One ex-guard admitted under oath, "We could unlock the doors but everyone knew who really ran the tier." In this environment, prison officials were custodians of buildings, but gangs were custodians of power. Control of territory also meant control of contraband. A single table in the yard might serve as a meeting point for drug exchanges. A laundry room could double as a smuggling hub. Showers became ideal sites for ambushes. And cell blocks under a gang's influence functioned as secure outposts where rivals feared to tread. In the 2013 Maryland BGF case, FBI surveillance revealed that entire housing units were effectively ruled by gang leaders. Correctional officers compromised by the gang allowed contraband to flow freely, while non-gang inmates were extorted simply for the privilege of safety within the territory. One of the most striking examples came from Pelican Bay State Prison in California, the notorious Supermax built in 1989. Designed to crush gang influence, Pelican Bay instead became the headquarters of several prison empires. Inside its notorious Security Housing Unit, SHU, gangs divided space with invisible lines. Investigators later testified that La IM leaders used coded kites to dictate which groups controlled which yards, which cells could be occupied, and even who had permission to walk in certain areas. A new inmate stepping into the SHU without knowledge of these invisible borders risked immediate assault. Control also extended to racial and ethnic divisions. In many prisons, gangs enforced strict segregation by space. The whites sat with the Aryan Brotherhood or affiliated gangs. Black inmates aligned with the BGF or Crips. Hispanics were divided into Serenos, Norteños, or the Syndicate. Chow halls became checkerboards of racial territories, where sitting in the wrong section was tantamount to signing a death warrant. A 2006 federal lawsuit described how even recreational equipment, basketball courts, weight benches, handball walls, was racially divided and gang-enforced. Guards often admitted they allowed these unofficial rules to stand, believing they prevented larger outbreaks of violence. But territorial codes weren't just about where you sat or walked, they were about survival strategies. An inmate without affiliation might find himself with no place at all. In one documented case from Texas, a newly arrived prisoner sat at a chow hall table without knowing it was controlled by the syndicate. Within minutes, he was beaten so badly he had to be hospitalized. The message was unmistakable: space is owned, not shared. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of territorial control is how invisible it can be. To an outsider, the prison yard may look like a mix of men scattered across open ground. But to those inside, it is a map of invisible borders, each watched, each enforced. One wrong step can trigger an ambush. Even guards walking the yard often admitted they could sense the tension, knowing that beneath the surface entire wars were being prevented or provoked by the invisible lines gangs had drawn. Attempts by prison officials to break this control often backfired. Housing rival gangs together could spark riots. Separating them could reinforce their dominance over their designated turf. Lockdowns slowed contraband for a time, but as soon as doors reopened, the territorial lines reappeared like scars. Decades of corrections reports reveal the same truth. Gangs adapt, reasserting their control regardless of official crackdowns. The code of territory and control ensured that prisons functioned less like institutions of rehabilitation and more like feudal kingdoms. Every yard was a battleground. Every cell block a fiefdom. For inmates caught in the middle, survival meant knowing the map, respecting the invisible lines, and never, ever forgetting who controlled the space. And in the next chapter we'll go deeper into the economy of survival, how gangs don't just claim territory but also turn it into profit, running empires of drugs, extortion, and smuggling that rival criminal organizations on the outside. Behind prison walls, violence and loyalty may keep gangs alive, but money keeps them powerful. In a closed system where freedom is stripped away, contraband becomes currency, and gangs control the economy like cartels behind bars. Everything, from cigarettes and drugs to cell phones and even food, can be bought, sold, or taxed. The gang's code of money is simple. Nothing moves without their permission, and every transaction comes at a cost. Contraband has been at the center of countless investigations. In 2013, the Maryland indictment against the Black Guerrilla Family revealed the staggering scale of prison smuggling. Correctional officers themselves were caught carrying in drugs, phones, and cash. One officer admitted she was making thousands of dollars a week smuggling heroin in food containers. Another testified she was pressured into smuggling cell phones by inmates who threatened violence if she refused. For the BGF, these contraband pipelines transformed prison cells into command centers. From inside their locked doors, leaders coordinated drug rings, ordered murders, and collected profits flowing out into the streets. Texas and California prisons tell the same story. Reports from the 1990s showed how the Texas Syndicate built entire extortion networks inside facilities. They imposed taxes on independent drug dealers, demanding a cut of profits. Inmates caught selling without approval were beaten, stabbed, or even killed. The message was clear: every dollar belonged to the gang. Commissary items were also exploited. Coffee, candy, and ramen noodles became valuable currency. Leaders enforced who could buy, who could sell, and who owed debts. A man with nothing might pay his way in loyalty. A man with money might pay in silence. Either way, the syndicate collected. The Aryan Brotherhood operated like a mafia. Federal prosecutors revealed how AB leaders collected rent from weaker inmates. If you wanted protection, you paid. If you wanted to stay alive, you paid. If you didn't pay, you became an example. Even small debts could turn deadly. In one case from the late 1980s, an inmate owed a few dollars worth of tobacco. He thought it was nothing. Weeks later, he was found dead in his cell, throat slashed. To the Brotherhood, it wasn't about the money, it was about enforcing the code. Debts were sacred, and punishment had to be absolute. Cell phones became the most valuable contraband of the modern era. With them, inmates could run drug operations on the streets, coordinate gang activity across states, and even intimidate witnesses outside. In one infamous case, an imprisoned gang leader in Georgia used smuggled phones to order the murder of a sheriff's family. The plot was uncovered before it could be carried out, but it showed how contraband gave gangs the ability to project power far beyond the bars. Control of money also meant control of manpower. Gangs rewarded loyal members with access to contraband or shares of profits. They punished disobedience by cutting off access or forcing members into debt they could never repay. Once in debt, an inmate often became a slave to the gang's will, carrying drugs, hiding weapons, or even carrying out hits to erase what they owed. What's chilling is how normalized this economy became. Guards admitted under oath that they sometimes looked the other way because keeping the peace often meant allowing gangs to control the trade. Prison officials cracked down repeatedly, but every seizure of drugs or phones was just a fraction of what flowed through. As one former warden put it, take away one phone, 3 more come in the next day. The code of money turned prison into more than a place of punishment. It became a thriving black market, where gangs operated with the efficiency of corporations and the ruthlessness of armies. For inmates, survival meant navigating this economy, either by paying into it, working for it, or being crushed by it. And for prison systems across America, the code of money remains the most dangerous weapon gangs wield, because it ensures their influence extends not just behind bars, but into communities, cities, and entire criminal networks on the outside. The brutal codes of prison gangs, loyalty, violence, territory, money, are not written on paper, but they are carved into flesh, passed through whispers and enforced with blood. They turn prisons into kingdoms where fear is the law and silence is survival. What begins behind razor wire doesn't stay there. These codes shape the streets, fuel crime across entire states, and keep gang power alive even when leaders are locked in the most secure cells in America. For the men trapped inside this system, the choice is cruel: obey the code or die by it. And yet, the story of these codes isn't just about gangs, it's about the prisons themselves. Decades of crackdowns, lawsuits, and reforms have failed to erase the unwritten laws. The question remains, are prisons controlling the gangs or are the gangs controlling the prisons? Thank you for watching this deep dive into the brutal codes of prison gangs. If you found this eye-opening, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with others who want to understand the hidden world behind the walls. Until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and remember, knowledge is power.